This is where conviction, and this is where authenticity, and this is where heart is so important when it comes to storytelling. Without it, you are filling a void, or you're talking to something that you don't actually truly believe in, and people are able to see through that. Welcome back to the Dreamers and Misfits podcast. We're going to jump right into it today because I have something that is kind of not bothering me, something that has been on my heart, something that's been on me that I feel as though that I have to share, something that I've been carrying for a little while, and I just want to kind of get it off my chest because chatting with somebody today, and we were just talking about podcasts, we're talking about how it's going, we've been evaluating some of the situations, some of the things that we've been doing, and one of the feedbacks that I got was just like, Ben, just say what you need to say, just like John Mayer, just say what you need to say. Just say what you need to say, and to be confident in what it is that you're saying. And I think sometimes it can be hard to have the confidence to say the things that you're saying, and to say it with conviction, and to say it concisely, because of the culture that we live in, that there's like this cancel culture. Not that I assume that I'm going to be canceled when I don't necessarily we're just starting here. However, there is this self-regulation that's been happening and has been bred into our culture to regulate ourselves because, there might be someone who is offended. And as the name of the podcast talks about, Dreamers and Misfits, we are going to offend people, and that should be something that we're okay with. And maybe even something that we should be excited about, that if we're offending somebody, as long as it's not offending somebody dramatically. But I think as a dreamer and a misfit, or if you see yourself in that way, offending somebody is something that you should be excited about, because that means that you're making some sort of progress. Sometimes speaking with conviction and speaking concisely is a difficult thing to do. I believe that communication is one of the most important things that somebody can learn, especially when they're in a space like this, or even just communicating with clients, or communicating with potential customers, communicating with coworkers, or people who are superiors. Communication is something that is learned, something I believe it's a craft, it's something that you can work on and get better at, but it is also something that a lot of people are really poor at. And communication is something that's near and dear to my heart, because growing up, when I decided that I wanted to be a pastor, I looked at communication as an art. I didn't necessarily see it as something that you just do, or a job, where I think many, many people in that field of Christianity and pastoring see it as a part of the job. And I think communication, and having great communication skills, specifically when you are speaking to many people, speaking in public, those types of things, is extremely important. And I think it's an art. I think it's something that you can work on. It's something that you can craft. But I also do believe that it's something not everybody has, because not everybody's an artist, and not everybody has the intangible, that gift, that thing that they have. So at a really young age, I started to look at different communicators, looking at how they do it, the way that they speak, the way that at certain moments that they pause, or they take moments of silence to really just emphasize their points, to make sure that there's breath in what they're saying, or in certain points to slow down or speed up, to get louder, to get closer to a mic. All these different techniques and part of the craft that can change and have massive effects on what it is that you're trying to communicate. And when you're learning communication and you're learning these types of things, it is a very powerful and can be an extremely effective tool. And it is a very, very effective tool when it's used very, very well, when it's used with intention. And again, when you treat it like an art, you treat it like something that is living and breathing, and you kind of work with it and work around it. All of those things, they work very, very well together, and they are extremely good. And that's why, great leaders need to be great communicators. People who are running businesses, people who are trying to communicate anything or transcend anything beyond themselves, need to have some sort of level of communication and have some sort of reverence or respect for what it is that they're trying to communicate, and how and the medium in which that they're trying to do so. So as I begin to do this podcast and all these things, I'm like reminded of little things here and there where it's like, oh, I fell back into old habits. I fell back into different things. And then there's other elements of it that have been added to my communication that I didn't understand that I was going to be able to or have to deal with. And one of them being speaking with such conviction. As I'm recording more and more podcasts and creating more and more content, I have gone back to some of my old talks, my old sermons and stuff like that, and I have listened to them. And the one thing that I came back to consistently, I was like, man, I spoke with conviction. I spoke with like there was something burning inside me that I was like, I need to get this out, and I need to get this out in the best way possible. And although there are some things that I look at my communication that I was like, oh man, like you're still like very young. That was one thing that there was a passion and a conviction that was tangible, something that there was a fire that was inside me that I just needed to get this out, that I felt as though that there had been something deposited inside of me that I needed to do justice to and to communicate well. And though it was just a small comment of this person who's helping me produce this podcast, when she just mentioned, she's like, hey, just like, maybe just like stop a little bit and just take a breath and maybe don't go into little caveats, or you don't have to preface everything that you say or like to soften the blow. Which is really interesting because this one thing that I always did when I was preaching in a church is I would look for how do I offend, and how do I create a statement or a phrase that I can present at the beginning that's going to offend you, so that you're going to think and question maybe what it is that you already know. So then I can then bring it back full circle. So it was almost like going back. I feel like I'm retraining myself on how to communicate and how to communicate well. And as some of the things that I've been doing, I've been taking a few courses and listening to some communication experts and stuff like that to continue to like work on my communication, to take out filler words, to take out there's a filler word right there, to take out those types of things to ensure that everything that I'm trying to say and the thing that I have inside me that I'm trying to communicate or pull out of other people as I have conversations with other people is done well, it's done concise, and it can be at a top tier that can help other people. And as a Christian, this is a reverence and something that you have because you are preaching the Word of God. You are preaching a book that you feel as though that is given to humanity to recount the gospel of Jesus Christ, and that is what you are to share with others. So there's a reverence and a respect that you have to have when you are sharing anything out of that, especially when you are preaching or in a pulpit or in a context in which you're sharing this to many people and many people have your attention. There's a respect and a reverence that is kind of understood in the church that's not just for anyone, that the people that do it need to respect it and need to do it well, need to communicate it well. And there's something bigger than yourself that you're trying to communicate. So you work on your craft, you work on these things, you do these things to ensure that everything that you're doing is effective, and it can be the most effective that you possibly can. And these are the first people that I ever really had seen that have such a respect for communication, such a respect for storytelling, such a respect and the ability to do it. And some of my favorite communicators of all time would be someone like T.D. Jakes, Bishop T.D. Jakes, who is a pastor down in Texas, and then also Pastor Stephen Furtick in North Carolina at Elevation Church. These are the two, kind of like the two people who I really started to craft my communication around. and I started to take tips from them and started to read different books that they've read and really dissect the types of things that they were talking about, and dissect not just what they were saying, but how they were presenting it. How were they crafting this idea that they had to in order to really communicate it really, really well. And as I began this podcast, I came up with a framework. I came up with an idea of, okay, this is how it's going to be kind of broken down. And as I started to develop all these communication skills and these ideas of communication and how it is, I'm going to take other people's communication and kind of like take things from some people, take things from other people, really start to like change it into my own flair to it, like it matches my personality. One thing that both of them are really, really good at is both of them can sing. I can't. So that is like an element that I like can't bring into my communication. So just taking things from other people and then like applying it to where I feel as though that it really authentically shares how I feel, whatever it is that I'm communicating needs to be communicated across. And as I sat down to really trying to figure out what the podcast is going to look like first episode, I was like, okay, this isn't going to work. This isn't the framework I'm going to work in. This isn't necessarily the framework that I feel as though that I'm comfortable to communicate in. But the one communication format that I feel as though is the best communication format that I have seen, and I there was a few years there that I was even studying it because I was obsessed with how well they were able to captivate people for 30-40 minutes at a time. Longer than that, an hour plus at a time. And that's film. Film is one of those things where many people will sit down for a 3.5 hour movie normally because they want to be entertained, or they want to watch a movie and they want to hear a good story. And the best examples of this are the longer series that you see, like the Lord of the Rings or the Harry Potters, where you have diehard fans who sit down and watch like 3-hour movies continuously. And in order to keep someone engaged over 3 hours, let alone multiple movies that are 3 hours, you need to really understand how to tell a story and how to draw things out of certain characters, how to draw emotions out of your audience, how to do all of these certain things to really craft a story that people are going to relate to, but then also get a message across in which that you want to get across to people, whether it's making a difference or whether it's just, the feeling of a great story or something way deeper than that. So film is really like the epitome of what this is, because you are able to captivate millions and millions of people over 3 hours, which is a crazy idea and is a crazy thing. However, the one thing that they do have that I think is really, really playing in for them is this idea of having many, many senses that you're able to touch on, because you have visual, you have touch, you have hear. Sorry, you do not have touch. You have sound, and you have sight. So these two together are like 2 of the 5, which is already a huge win that you're having for people compared to somebody who's just talking on stage. Because even though you might be looking at them and there might be, certain interactions that you can do, unless you are going full out with like a full illustration, really it's just an auditory experience that you're really having. However, with a movie, you can have audio, you can have music, you can have sound design is one way, which is like a different type of audio, and then you have music, which is like another type of audio, but then you have the visual parts of it as well. And then if you get into more intense, you have like the 4D movies where you have like the chairs moving and you have different things like that. So like there are many different things that you can bring into this type of medium. So it's like, how do you touch on all those senses? And this is something that Walt Disney tried to do, and really what started Walt Disney's jump into the theme park world, where he was creating these animations and then wanted to bring more of these elements in to get people immersed into his stories, where he went to all these theaters and was like, hey, I want to play this, but I want to have surround sound, and I want to have different things that are happening. I believe one of them was like squirting water and stuff like that, and they basically were like, no, we're not going to do this. These theaters are like, we can't do this because we're not just going to do this for one movie. And that's when he was like, okay, fine, I'm just going to do it myself. And then he started the idea of Walt Disney World came out of that, or Walt Disney World. Disneyland came out of that idea, which is a wild thing, because all of it just came from the simple fact that he wanted to tell better stories. And communication is really what that journey has been to me, where I have been trying to continuously just tell a better story more, and I'm just trying to tell better stories every day. And it all started with me hearing preachers. It all started with me hearing how preachers were conveying the gospel, how different people were conveying how it is that Jesus lived on the earth, and how that affects your life for your daily life. And like I said, the best communicators that were doing this were leading usually larger organizations, and there seemed to be a direct correlation with the better that you communicate, the larger impact you would have, and the larger organization that inevitably you would lead. Because if you're able to tell a better and effective story, more people are going to watch it. And you see this with higher caliber movies, where better movies have better directors who are able to tell better stories inevitably draw more money and draw more people to it. And it's a really interesting idea, because the idea of story is really the crux of everything that humanity is the one thing that we have done since the dawn of time is we have told stories to each other and told stories to our ancestors, and so that they've been passed down over and over and over again. So the idea of communication is one that is near and dear to my heart, and is near and dear to, I think, humanity, because in order to tell better stories, you also need to live life. You need to have stories to tell. You need to rub shoulders with people because they know, so that you can be relatable. This is something that is interesting that I have heard actually quite recently with the comics world, where comedians, there is different stages of comedians, where like you start out, or you're just a normal comedian and you're usually like pretty funny, and then you get larger opportunities and you begin to like refine your craft, and you get better and better at telling your material, and your material comes from your everyday life and the things that you see, so therefore it's like really, really relatable. But then there's like a different level of comedian that you hit, where you have lots of money. You now have like financial security, you're traveling like the nation, or you're traveling the world doing all these gigs, and all of a sudden your material dries up because you don't have boots on the ground, and your material starts to suffer because your jokes now become about first class airlines or security lines or tour buses and all of these things that now are no longer relatable. And I think it's a really fascinating idea, because there's this idea of story is what keeps us grounded. Story is this thing that is what moves us forward, because we're constantly trying to tell a better story. We're constantly trying to relate with other people. We're constantly trying to connect with other people through this idea of story. And it's something that happens every day. It happens through everything that we do and all the things that we do. And it feels as though that everything at the end of the day comes down to that business success comes down to how can you tell a better story about yourself, so therefore you become more attractive to other people. Dating is how can you tell and present a better story of yourself so that the person sitting across from you at the dinner table is willing to go on a second date with you. Being a parent or a father is being able to tell and create stories with the ones that you love so that they're going to remember it and have that feeling or impression in which that you're trying to impose on them. Literally everything comes down to the story and how well can you tell a story. And it's not just an auditorial story. And I think that's the thing that maybe not a whole lot of people understand is story is told in many, many different mediums. Communication is presented in many, many mediums. Communication can be presented auditorially like this, where I can sit down and you can listen to somebody talk and tell a well-crafted story. There are silent films where stories are presented because of just the visuals that you see. I have watched many silent films where I have wept because of the emotion that is conveyed through just visual storytelling. There is also like feeling and touch, and there's a part of just the different like senses and touches that you can have, or through smell, and there's all of these different things that you all of these tools that you have really in like your toolkit of communication, and you need to pick and choose when you use them at the right time and when not to use them. And the people that really, really excel at communication are the ones that are aware of those tools and then use them and learn how to use them well. This is something that I'm constantly trying to explain to clients or potential clients when we are trying to do workshops or ad campaigns or branding campaigns, because there's this idea of brand that has really been really, really popular, especially because like personal brand has been something that has been extremely popular throughout the past few years, which I understand why it's happening. However, there's like this really, really poor understanding of what brand is. And I think it's because people just don't know how to tell stories, or don't understand the concepts of story, because they've never really thought about it. They've never really thought about a good salesman as just a great storyteller. And there are all of these different pieces that go together to like, how do you tell a better story? So when I talk to different clients and when I talk to different companies, this is one of the biggest things that I bring up is like, how do you perceive yourself? And then how does your customer perceive you? Because often there is a disconnect, or there's a gap between those two things. And they're like, oh, but we told them this, so therefore this is how they should feel and act, which is such a crappy understanding of what it actually is and how you actually communicate anything that you are. Because at the end of the day, I have many, many friends and people in my life who I have become friends with them, not necessarily just because of, oh, I've told them that this is the person that they present it. They haven't just told me this is the type of person that I am, but I've experienced the type of person that they am. I've experienced their love. I've experienced their kindness. I've experienced They're tenderhearted. I've experienced maybe their anger. I've experienced how they act in different situations. And all of that combined is what has made me come to the consensus of this person is my friend or this person is not my friend. And it's all of these different things. And it comes from like 1,000 different areas where a consumer now comes to a conclusion of this is who I think that you are, or this is who I know you to be because of X, Y, Z, etc., etc. And these are the things, and it's at the end of the day, this is self-awareness. That's basically what this comes down to, is a self-awareness of how well you are able to tell story or authentically tell story. Because the other thing too is there are great storytellers out there, but they're not authentic storytellers out there. And I think that there's a big difference between the two, because a good storyteller can tell an amazing story but be super cheeky about it, or it can be cheesy. For example, in my opinion, the Marvel movies are horrible stories. I don't think they're great stories that are being told. However, there are still lots of people that like them and they buy into them because, yeah, it's a good story, but not an authentic story. And I think when you combine the two, an authentic and a good story is when you just have like a proper human experience where you want to be around whatever that is more, whether it's a company or a person. You just want to be around that more because it was a good story, you benefited from it, and it was authentic, so it touched the heart. So I think that's the difference between a good and a great company, or a good or a great friend, or a good spouse or a great spouse, is the ability to connect to that heart and not in the authenticity, while using story to communicate the things in which that you want to communicate. And when I say story, it's not just sitting down and it's this ongoing thing that is constantly happening. It's this ongoing conversation that is happening with the words that you say, how you act, your reputation, how you react to certain things. And that, at the end of the day, is really what story is it's all of these things coming together. And there are so many different words for it, because in business you use brand, in film you use story, in life you just use like character, like you know somebody's character and their character is really what follows with them. And that's why, like, when people talk about when people talk about personal brand specifically, all it is your reputation at scale. And for a lot of people, that should be terrifying, because you know that you aren't a good person, or you aren't authentic to what it is that you're doing, or you might be seen out, like you might not have total integrity when it comes to that. So when it comes to it, this is why I love communication, and why I have fallen in love with communication. And I'm like so excited to get back into it, to craft what it is that I'm trying to do, to really like push and pull in certain areas, to raise my voice when I need to really just take the time and to like interject silence when there needs to be, because there's a dance that happens when you are communicating something well. And then when you fuel proper communication with a heart and something that is authentic to you, there's nothing that is able to stop it. Because at the end of the day, if people ever call you phony, or you feel as though that you're not being authentic, and you know that you are, there's nothing to be apologetic for. There's nothing that you need to sit back or be worried about, because you know that you are who you are. And if you are that person on camera, and you're also that person to your loved ones off camera, then there should be no fear of saying whatever you want to say with conviction and with boldness, and being being excited about potentially offending people along the way. Because that is really what it comes down to, is if you are authentic to who it is that you feel as though that you want to be. If you are authentic to that inner voice, that inner feeling, that call of God, whatever you want to call it, if you're authentic to that with your whole heart, and it offends people, that should be okay. You should be excited about that. If you know that you are being authentic to yourself and you're being true to what it is that you feel as though you've been called to, or you've been placed on the earth to do or fulfill, and it's offensive, that excites me, because those are the types of people that I rub shoulders with. Those are the types of people that I am excited about. That is why I've called this the Dreamers and Misfits podcast, because those are the types of people that I am like, yes, let's do life together, because I want to rock the boat. I want to shake the boat. I'm the type of person where I'm like, okay, we're going into battle. We're doing this. Let's burn the boats. There's nothing left. Let's figure it out, and let's push forward, because I believe so much in what it is that we're going to do. And that is the core of all of this, is like, I want to help and be around people who are so excited to shake things up, because they feel as though that the way that it's been done is not necessarily the best way, and there's a better way to do things. And I want to be around people that ask questions, that shake things up, who are the dreamers and misfits in this world, who want to make change and radically shift how it is that we look and feel and experience the world. Because those are my people. Those are the people where I'm like, yes, let's do this. I don't want to just continue the status quo for the sake of doing it, just because this is how you have the most comfortability. This is how you get your picket fence outside of your house. This is how you. That's it. That is the. That's the excitement of life. That is the excitement of life. And I want to be around those types of people. The people who are sick and tired of the status quo and want to change things and want to adjust things. When I was a kid, there was a feeling of defeat and frustration, of being misunderstood, of people not knowing why I wanted to do certain things that were like bigger than myself, why I didn't necessarily want a typical job, why I wanted to be involved in things that were bigger than myself. My first experience of being like a misfit was when my parents got divorced. I was like one of the few kids in my school who had divorced parents. And in the schoolyard, I was playing basketball with another kid, and I beat him. And, as kids do, like, we're chirping against each other, and we're talking, and he's throwing shade at me, and vice versa, and we're just being kids, especially because I'm like, I'm pretty jacked up. And then he kind of turns to me, and he's like, yeah, well, at least my parents aren't divorced. And I remember laughing at him. I remember laughing in his face, being like, "Oh, like, yeah, okay, that's like, you got me. My parents decided not to be together. Like, that's my fault." Which is maybe a little bit of a different response to what normal kids would have, because majority of kids, when their parents get divorced, they assume it's their fault, or as seemingly that is the general consensus. But as a kid, I knew it wasn't my fault, because I saw dysfunction and I saw things that were happening that were not okay. So I knew it wasn't my fault. But when he called me out and said that, he said, "Oh, well, at least my parents aren't divorced." He got in a lot of trouble. But that was like the first moment where I'm like, oh yeah, like, you're right. I am one of the only kids in my school who my parents are divorced. I'm one of the only people that really have experienced that or felt that. And I came from like a smaller town, so a lot of the kids that were in my like small town were like maybe a little bit more privileged, where like they had like cottages and boats and stuff like that. So they had like the perfect life. It was the white picket fence outside of the front. Their parents were together. It was like a very, very typical nuclear family experience for 99% of the people that I was around. So being one of the kids who was a misfit or an outcast in that sense of not having a traditional family life, it was interesting because it made me relate to other people who maybe didn't experience the world the way that all these other people and all these other kids were experiencing it. And I was like, oh, maybe there's other people in the world experiencing this just like I was. And I didn't really know how to reconcile that. I didn't really know how to reconcile that with myself. What does that look like? How am I going to take that into my life? How am I going to do anything about that? Like, I'm also like, I knew that I wasn't like a weird kid, so I'm not gonna like just like hang out with like other people because I feel as though like I have something in common with them, I guess. I just like I didn't know how that was gonna reconcile with myself. And when my stepdad came into the picture, one of the first things that one of the first conversations that him and my mom had were talking about like faith and talking about religion and how that plays into our life. And we were never a family that went to church or didn't even know what church was really before my stepdad. And then when my stepdad came into the picture, we went to a church. And when we went to a church, they were talking about Jesus and how the life that he can bring and how he came and died for our sins in replace of the sacrifices and the religion that was in place, so that we no longer have to sacrifice animals to suffice for our sins, that Jesus paid it all, that he paid the price. And then when he died and rose again, that was the ultimate sacrifice, and that he came and he paid our debt for us. And when that was explained to me, I asked them like some more questions in terms of like, okay, like what does that actually mean? Because as like an 8-year-old, I'm like, what is Jewish tradition again? And not understanding exactly how that plays into Christianity and all of these things. But basically, like the sentiment that I got out of it was like, you can have a better life and you can have more meaning to life. And this is something that anybody can have, and it's accessible to all people. And right away, like almost instantly, I was like, oh, I want to be a pastor. This is it. Like this is what I'm going to do in my life. I'm going to be a pastor, because this is where the reconciliation came in my mind, where I was like, oh, this is a toolkit. This is a faith. This is a mindset. This is a lifestyle in which that misfits fit in. People who don't feel like they belong necessarily with the world, people who feel as though that they've been outcasted or been condemned, can now have a place of safety and reassurance and have a life of abundance. And this is the reconciliation that I was looking for as a kid, where it's like, oh, I found it. Like I understand what this means, and then I can be a pastor and I can bring this thing that I have to other people. And that's where the communication started for myself, where it's like, okay, like if this is the message, how do I communicate that the best way that I possibly can to ensure that I do whatever I do the gospel justice, but in also that I also am able to do it well, to do it in a way that is seen by other people, that is known by other people, and that can be effective to actually communicate and reach these people. So that's when it all started in terms of communication, and how do you do this, and how do you do it well, and how do we package this all? Because for me, growing up, not from a Christian church, I didn't understand that there was anything in terms of like church politics. I didn't understand that you have to do things a certain way. I had literally like zero understanding of anything of Christian culture before becoming a Christian. It literally zero. I had like zero Christian culture idea and ideology. So in my mind, I was like, okay, this is the message. I can take this message to any context. And then as I began to like do more and understand things, and then I started to listen to only Christian music, and like my mom became a Christian, so like our Christian became like a Christian household. They started like love, laugh, live all over the walls, and started to have wooden signs everywhere and Bible scriptures everywhere. We very much became that family. You start to learn Christian culture, and you start to learn the certain things that you can say and do and act a certain way, and this is the way that a Christian is supposed to present as. This is the way that a Christian is supposed to act and sound and look like. And so much so that there was like in early Instagram, there was like starter packs where it was like 4 different images, and in these images it'd be like 4 different things. It's like if you do these 4 things, basically you'll become whatever the result is. And like the starter pack of like of a youth pastor was like skinny jeans, spiked hair, a Bible, and a Toby Mac CD. Then it was like, that's like the starter pack of being that, and that's who I became. That is the identity that I put on myself. I was like, I'm going to be a youth pastor. This is the thing that I'm going to be. And I was like, youth pastor. I said that because I was like, oh, that's just how you work your way up the ladder. You become a youth pastor, and then maybe you become a communications pastor, and then maybe after that, you'll become a lead pastor. So I learned all this stuff. I learned how to do these things. I knew how to talk and speak Christian. I knew how to communicate in a certain way to be effective, and what effective looked like. And I started to craft all of these things. And then after I was going to go to Bible college, the goal was to go to Bible college right out of high school. I didn't have enough money to go to Bible college, so I got a job framing for a company. In like that was a friend of ours and a friend at church, and I am forever grateful for this job because it's one of the best jobs I've ever had. I think in terms of work culture was like pretty decent, but also like work ethic was just like through the roof. The efficiency was like through the roof. I learned so many practical skills. I met some like amazing people that I still adore to this day. And when I started working for this framing company, it felt like a flashback to when I was 8 years old again, because I was no longer in like the Christian culture, and I was no longer in this curated Christian experience. I was no longer in that, where I was rubbing shoulders with people who were living real life, people who were going through divorces, people who were having spousal issues, people who were trying to raise a kid by themselves, people who were like 30, 40 years old who like still didn't know what they're going to do with their life, people who had like a very, very lack of identity and didn't know what was next for them, people who were dealing with like drug addictions, people who were like just like normal life. I was just dealing and like having conversations with the people, being friends with these people, and it like kind of rocked my world in a lot of way, because I had been in this Christian bubble for so long that it kind of like shook my head, and I was like, oh, whoa, the way that I talk about Jesus, the way that I talk about the things that I want to do, I like couldn't talk to them and almost didn't know how to talk to them because they didn't understand anything that I was saying, and I like legitimately took on a different language that they didn't understand. Even though we were both speaking English, I was using words that they didn't understand because they weren't Christian. And I don't know that I even like fully realized that, because there are often times where it's like, oh, like, yeah, I know you just like hate church, you don't like church. Not understanding that it was a poor way of me communicating it and poor way of me doing it. And there's also this this like a part of Christian culture that is like this underlying like you gotta get them in a weird sense where it's like there's always an agenda when you're talking to somebody who's not a Christian that is like, oh, you're gonna get saved, like I'm gonna get you saved, which is so stupid and so weird and gross and almost like sleazy salesman like BS. And it rocked me. It rocked me in a real way because I'm like, oh man, I'm like 18 years old, going to become a youth pastor, and I can't talk to these other adults. Like, what is wrong with me? Like, what have I been doing wrong? This is a weird thing that I'm experiencing here, especially because I'm literally going to be a pastor. This is what I'm wanting to do, is to do these things. And I always found it like that season of my life to be so interesting because it was the start of something that I didn't really know that was going to manifest itself, because I have always been like, I'm going to be a pastor the rest of my life. But it's something that started really, really early in me, whereas I started to ask questions where I was like, is this the best way to do things? Is this really the things to do? Is this like, this doesn't feel like this is being effective. This doesn't feel like this is actually happening. And I grew up in an era of church where the solution of connecting to more people was having more lights, having better music, having all of these things, and to like upping like the production level of everything. And that's how you'd communicate better to people. And luckily for me, I was really, really good at that. I have like a production background where like I have helped in many churches in the production sense, built stage design, lighting, sound, all that kind of stuff. And I know how to put on an amazing event. I'm really good at it. I know that I'm really good at it. And that is something that I was like, oh, I can bring this to the church. So like, honestly, when I was 18, I was like, I didn't really feel as though that it was the communication or the storytelling that I needed to improve on for the sake of having regular conversations with people, but rather it was, hey, how do I upskill the production in which that I'm doing things so that it will be more attractive to people? And attractive in my sense was, how does it look better, and not necessarily how does it feel or how does it like legitimately communicate to people better. And this was, again, like, this is the kind of like the next step where I was like, okay, like this is kind of weird, but I'm like, oh, they just haven't seen what good church looks like. And they're like, to compound that idea and that thesis that I had was they just haven't seen good church and they don't know what good church looks like. I had a friend who was like, oh, like, he's like, yo, what are you doing this week? And I was like, oh, I'm going to a concert. And it was like a Christian church or a Christian band concert. And he's like, oh, like what band? And I was like, this. And he's like, oh, I have no idea who that is. So yeah, I know. And I like sent him some of the music. He's like, what, that's Christian? I was like, yeah, see, you don't know what Christian can look like. Like, you've just never seen Christianity done well. And in Christianity done well, when I say that, I mean as though that you don't know what a surface level Christianity looks like, because what looked well in my mind at the time was great production, great graphics, a good speaker. And yeah, and then from there I was like, okay, like this is something that's happening. Like, people don't know how it looks good, and clearly it's not being communicated well. I don't know how to communicate the gospel well. And then eventually I went to my school. I went to Bible college, and in my first year, when I was looking for schools to go to, I went to a conference, a local conference, and there was somebody who was speaking close by, and I heard like great things about him, and I heard him preach, and his preach and what he was preaching on was very similar to what was like stirring in my heart. It's like, I want to reach people who are dreamers and misfits, people who don't think the same, people who might have different ideologies. I want to talk to people who are pushing the status quo, who are like, these are the types of people that like we need to reach, and we need to whatever. And I was like, man, I don't know who this guy is like fully, but I was like, I need to figure out where he is, where he's from. So I just like Googled him, found out that he was like pastoring at a Bible college. And I was like, amazing. Applied for it, got accepted. And then I flew out. And that was that. And then I like started to go. And then like in just as I was flying out, like I think like a week before, they're like, him and his wife were like, hey, we're leaving the Bible college. And I was like, cool, sounds great. Like, I'm not going to be a pastor that is good at what I do anymore because these people have left. And I'm like, these are some of the only leaders that I've seen doing the things that I feel as though that they need to do. And then it turned out that they were leaving for a church right down the road. So I was like, amazing. This is actually probably even better because I'm going to try to be an intern there and whatnot. So that's what I did. That's what I did. I went to that church the first Sunday. I introduced myself. I was like, hey, my name's Ben. Like, I actually heard you guys preaching at a conference back in Ontario, and I saw you. I flew out here to BC because like I think you guys are amazing leaders, and I just want to like figure out how I can help and serve and be whatever it is that needs to be. And that's what I did. I was just there. I was volunteering. I was trying to do everything that I could. I met the worship pastor there, Braden, which is like one of my best friends now. And we were like creating stage designs, doing, different things like that. We were creating all of these different production things. And again, like the church that we were at was like a 150-year-old church. And there was a very, very large aesthetic issue. Old church, like nasty carpets, like pews, like just like a very, very old looking church. And we were like, hey, there was a really young teen that was there that was like, hey, you want to bring things up and like level things up aesthetically? And I was like, this is my jam. This is exactly what I'm good at. And then when I came out, yeah, like I was doing stage design, I was doing different sounds, I was rewiring boards and stuff like that, doing anything that I could do to help. And then eventually I was offered to be like an intern there, which is just internships in churches very rarely are paid. So I was there, and I just basically just like I was there more hours than I was at the school, studying for whatever I was studying for my classes. And that's how I got into this. I did whatever I needed to do, whether it was stage designs or whether it was helping out at junior youth, and like whatever it needed to be. And then eventually they're like, hey, we have a paid position for you. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. I'm so excited. Lord, thank you for your blessings and your prosperity that you've placed upon my life. Thank you. And I was like, amazing. What is the position that you want to hire me for? And they were like, we have a night janitor position. I was like, whatever it takes. Sacrifice for the Lord. And which is like, I say that, I say that jokingly, but I am genuinely so grateful for that, because I would go in and I would just clean the church at night, and I would lock it up for security and make sure that it's all locked. Which, by the way, if you've ever been to church at night, it is the creepiest place in the entire world. And complete side note here, there was one time when I was cleaning the auditorium. It was a very, very large building. So there's one big auditorium. There's a massive hallway, and then another auditorium. I was locking everything up. This was the same week that the movie It came out. And the previous week, the youth was playing the Super Mario Kart's tag, where basically you have balloons on you, and everyone runs around, and you like have to pop each other's balloons. And as I was cleaning up after that night, I like got everything ready, and then I just needed to lock up that last auditorium. And I walk into the auditorium, and there is a red balloon floating in the middle of the auditorium. Not even up at the top. Not even up the top. Not on the ground. Floating where the string is 2.5 feet off the ground. Floating there. I had just watched it a few days earlier. Absolutely terrifying. You're in there, it's dark, you can't really see, you're kind of squinting and looking, and then the exit sign is really the only thing that's illuminating anything in it. So there's like just this like red a haze over everything, and then this balloon it was absolutely terrifying. To this day, terrifying. Churches at night, don't go. It's not worth it. It's scary. But I was so grateful for this time where I was able to, get a little bit of money in my pocket, and then also just be at the church and be at the place where I wanted these things to do, and where I wanted to grow and become a better leader. And all of that kind of ended came to this point where I was like just grinding, doing the things, did whatever I needed to do to be around people that I felt as though that were doing something that was actually worthwhile. And there was growth, there was all of these amazing things. And then eventually, once my wife and I got married in that time, and we moved all the way out here. And when we moved here, same thing. She's like, this is one of the best churches that I've ever been to. This is amazing. This is such growth. This is doing great things. And I've talked about this in previous episodes, how the system in which that we saw was broken. And there was this feeling that like things were starting to become broken. And inside of me, this thing was already starting to like come to fruition, because when I came into like the framer job and I was framing, I was like, oh man, I don't know how to communicate the gospel. And I figured as though that being at the Bible college would help me do that. And all I did was solidify my Christian language and how to talk more Christian and how to have more resources to call back to withhold my Christian slangs. That's basically all it did in that season of my life. And then I was seeing all these things, and how do you communicate the gospel well, and how do you do these things? And then I was like, oh, the way to do it is to make it look more and more attractive. And we made the church look really, really good. We did the logos, we did the floors, we did the building, like so many different things that made the church like so much more attractive. But then there was this like almost plateau of effectiveness that we felt. There was this plateau of, are we actually changing people's lives, or is there just a growth, or is there just a transfer growth that is happening among this church? And as I like started to get more and more of a voice when it came to this church, and as the pastors started to give me more and all these things, and I started to be in like larger meetings, and people started to see me as something more than just the kid intern, we began to have some like really serious questions. And we started to have these serious questions about like what it is that we're doing. And all of this has been stirring in me for years and years and years. There's been something that has been inside me that has been happening for years, where it's like, I was in a position where I saw this idea I had this idea and this ideology of Christianity and what it was going to look like and how easy it was going to be to like convert people. And then I was in that context and I was like, I have no idea what to say, and I have no idea how to communicate this. I was like, I can communicate this so well to Christians. I was like, I can get a room of thousands standing on their feet, excited for the Lord. Give me a mic. Watch me do it. Like there is no doubt in my mind. I have less faith in me putting down my daughter successfully at night than I do in my ability to hype up a room of Christians. I will take that bet any day of the year. I have a larger fight with my daughter putting her to bed than I do getting a room of Christians excited. It is almost too easy. Like it's laughably easy. And the thing about that is we started to see these patterns. We started to see these things. And all of us all together, I started to see this pattern that was happening amongst churches across the nation. And part of the issue that was happening was we were seeing these massive churches growing all at the same time. So you were seeing the elevation churches, and you were seeing like the Hillsongs and these massive churches that are growing exponentially over and over and over again. And the what it seemed like from the outside, what they were doing is they're just making cooler things, making them more accessible to younger people, and they're just doing it on like a level that was just like, it was top notch, and they still are. They're like top notch creatives, and their ability to create content is like just top notch. And then you have that with like a charismatic preacher or somebody who is really, really good at communicating something. You're like, okay, you guys have the whole thing. And we basically followed the same model in a lot of ways, where we like redid everything. Everything looked great. Everything looked so much like cleaner and better and like younger. And then also like we have like our two lead pastors were the best communicators in the country at the time. So like we had it all. We're just like, okay, like it's not a matter of when. It's not a matter of if, but it was a matter of when we were going to become the largest church in Canada. And I truly, truly believe that if we didn't all leave, I truly believe that we would have been one of, if not the largest church in Canada, if we had kept doing the things that we were doing. However, this is where conviction, and this is where authenticity, and this is where that heart is so important when it comes to storytelling, because without it, you are filling a void, or you talking to something that you don't actually truly believe in, and people are able to see through that. And when you start to have these types of convictions and things like that, and when you're a person who has seen or has been called a misfit or has been called a dreamer, and you start to have this feeling and this thing inside you that you just can't ignore anymore, when you start to have those feelings and you start to have those convictions, it starts to bleed into everything that you do, you lose motivation in the things that you used to do, because you don't see the impact, or you don't see the things in which that are actually providing or producing any sort of fruit out of your life. So all of us almost simultaneously all started having this feeling of like, there's a few different things that were happening. The first one that we realized very, very quickly is all of us were trying to replicate a church model that was being produced in the States. Now, lots of people think that because Canada and the United States are in close proximity, that we assume the same culture and we are the same culture. Our culture is very, very different. Our culture is very, very different. Canada's culture is actually a lot more similar to Australia or New Zealand than it is to the States. So when it comes to conviction in an authoritative way, of like, this is what you need to believe, this is what you need to do, this is, and those types of preachers and things to communicate the gospel, it hits different in the States, because they were founded on the Bible. They were founded on a Christian religion. They were founded on these things, where Canada was not founded on those things. Canada was not founded on a religion. We are like a mixing pot or a melting pot of so many different ethnicities and cultures and people, because we're a fairly new country. Like, we're only like 150 something years old. And so because of that, we're like a melting pot of so many different things that have come in to create whatever Canadian culture is. So because of that type of authoritativeness and that type of direct, this is the way it is because this is what God said, or like the man of God, bringing down like the tablets to, show these people that like, this is what God has revealed to me. That kind of stuff doesn't fly in Canada, and it doesn't work in Canada, because people can see through it pretty quickly, and they don't respond well to those types of things. So that was one thing that we felt as though that we were like, okay, we're building a Christian organization that looks like the ones in the States, but there are some things that just don't work, and they don't feel like they're actually working in the same way. So much so, they weren't working so much so that Elevation, one of the largest growing churches in the United States, planted one in Toronto, and they actually almost closed down because they weren't seeing the same amount of growth in Canada as they were in the States. This is something that is like not foreign to people, and even company is not foreign. There is just a very, very different culture that happens. So that was one thing that we were starting to understand. We were like, okay, we need to do things maybe a little bit different. The other thing that we really noticed was specifically in our area, because our area is called the Bible Belt of Canada, where basically there was just like an immense amount of churches. Like there was a ridiculous amount of churches. There are almost as many churches as Tim Hortons as there are in Abbotsford. There's actually probably more. I think there's more churches than there is Tim Hortons in Canada in Abbotsford. I think that there's more. Basically, that being said, there are so many churches, and there were a few big churches, specifically in our denomination, and a majority of the staff had been there long enough that they have seen ebbs and flows in each church. And with the ebbs and flows of each church, basically what had happened was there was one church that would grow, and then there would be like a pastoral change, there'd be something change, and then they would start to dwindle, and then the other church would start to grow. And the reason why that other church would start to grow is because there was transfer growth from another church. So it was basically a bunch of people ping-ponging between like 5 or 6 different churches over many, many years. And then it was like growth, revival, all of these different things where like it was just fabricated numbers that were actually happening. And then the third thing that was happening was our entire denomination had this plan where it's like we want to see 3% of Canadians in a PAOC church by the end of 2030. 2030 or was it 2020? It might have been 2020. I think it actually was 2020. So it was like 3% of churches by 2020, but 3% of Canadians in churches by 2020. And they absolutely missed that goal so hard. They missed that goal so hard. And as we were looking through the numbers, because I started Bible college in 2016, and it was in 2016 where like all of us started to have this conversation briefly of like, hey, like church numbers are dwindling, these numbers are going down more and more. And like, what's going to happen? How are we going to steer the ship? How are we going to do these things? And then that's when we like, started renovating the church and making things look good, new logos, better programs, all these types of things. And we were like seeing all these things. And then there was reports coming out from statistic companies and different denominations where it's like, oh, like, Christians are dwindling in the world, and this is what was happening specifically in Canada. This is what's happening. But then there was also another metric, which they call transfer growth, where it's basically like other denominations, smaller denominations, were actually like becoming non-existent, and those people were leaving those denominations and coming to other churches. And we were like one of the biggest denominations in Canada, so like we were inevitably getting majority of that transfer growth. So there was a lot of people, specifically in the higher ups of our denomination, that was like, oh, we're growing. Like, look at all the things and amazing things that we're doing. It's like, we're growing. And we all kind of were like, well, are we growing? Because it doesn't seem like we're actually growing. It just seems like other people from other churches are coming to our church. And we're not like in competition with other churches. Our competition is not the church, it's the devil, and he's our enemy. So like I'm like, we're in partnership with these churches. Like, we want them to do better, we want them to do well, but there's feeling of like competition that is like, we need to like outdo the other churches. And all of us were like, no, like we're all on the same team here. We're not going to stab anybody in the back. Like, there's a reason why like armies, they put their shield forward, because they know that they have their back covered, because the people that are behind them and that are standing with them are the ones that are charging forward, and we're all making ground and taking ground together. So when one churches take ground, the other churches take ground as well. So they were like, we're not in competition with other people, we're in cooperation with others. And this is the way that we decided that we're going to live out our lives, and we're going to lead our church. This is the way that we're going to do it. So when we kind of came to all these things, we were like, man, like, okay, like we really need to start to do things a little bit different. And this idea of doing things different was just like mind-blowing to a lot of people. One, because we were growing really, really quick. We were growing really, really fast. And by growing, I mean our attendance was increasing. That's what I mean by growth. Our attendance was growing, which is like, okay, great. But we were like, okay, but like, is that actually a success metric? Is that actually like a KPI that we actually need to like be talking about, because we just talked about transfer growth. So like, is attendance actually something we should be looking at? Because I don't think that is actually something that is a viable metric, because it is skewed in so many different ways. And people are like, why would you change things? Because you guys are seeing growth and there's like health and all of these things. Like, why would you ever start to change things? And that's when we all had to have a very, very serious conversation with each other of like, okay, like, what does this look like, and how are we going to do this? And do we feel okay with continuing the way that we are and continuing the path that we are taking? Because we don't feel as though this is actually being effective. We don't feel as though this is actually fulfilling the mission that we feel as though God has placed on our heart. And this, for me, was a conversation and a long idea that has been slowly like birthed in me. Because at the beginning, when I was really like faced with the reality of like, oh man, the way that I communicate the gospel is like horrible, and it's really, really poor in a real life context, like a framing company. It's like no more real you can get than that, with real people, not like these like fake people. I was like, okay, there's like that's been faced. I'm like, okay, this is not like necessarily how it goes. And then with the reality of like the statistics of everything, I was like, okay, this is not how to grow a church properly, and not how to actually have impact and actually change people's lives. So then the question had to be asked. It's like, okay, then what is the best way to do this? And that's when things got real. And that's when things got scary. And that's when things decided to completely like blow up. When everything blew up, it was honestly, it was a perfect storm for everything that happened, all of it with all of us at the same time. Because one, we had proposed this idea of this new direction of church. We had proposed this idea of changing the name of a church. We had proposed this new model of doing church. And the typical model of doing church is you create, you have a Sunday morning service, people come to Sunday mornings, and then you have youth on a Wednesday, and then you have youth on a Friday. And then that's basically what you do. And then if you're a really good church, you have maybe a contact point in between there at some point with like your communications team. And if you're doing really well, you have small groups, and you guys are connecting along the way and connecting other people in the way. And what is funny and what is interesting with all of that is like we were doing it all really, really well, but we were like, okay, we're doing all of these things really well, but our metric for success is lives being changed, and we don't feel as though that people are. We feel like we're just talking to more Christians, and that's not the goal. The goal is if Christians are coming, for them to go out and to evangelize and to reach other people and to be the person that Jesus has called them to be everywhere that they are, not just when they're at a Sunday morning, not just when they're at a small group, and not when we're doing this. Side caveat with that is like people are like, oh, we go to church for community, and then they're like, the church is like, oh, but like we need small groups because of community. And it's like, okay, if a Sunday morning actually worked, then why would you need small groups? So there's already this broken down ideology of like, oh, church is for community, when if that was the case, you wouldn't need small groups, because that you guys say that is to foster community. So that is kind of like already where it's like, oh wait, there's a contradiction here. So then maybe there's actually a new way to do this. Maybe there's something else that's happening. And what happened with this church was, and I want to also say this, like just a precursor. I don't believe that this is actually the specific church's fault. I believe that this is actually a larger organizational issue that is happening. And so what happened with this specific church was, when we were there, is one of the things that we wanted to do is we wanted to change the name. Now, when we were there, the name has been the name for 150 years. So this is like it has Pentecostal in its name. It has like roots. It has the city. Like this is like it. So like we came in and we wanted to change the name. And that was met by like a lot of pushback, because it's like, oh, we know people need to know we're Christian. We need to know that we're Pentecostal. They need to know that we like are from Abbotsford. We need to know all these things by our name. And simply we were just asking the question, and it was like, well, if God, like Jesus says that people will know us by our love, then therefore why do they need to know us by our name? And if we're actually living a life that is called out, but if we're actually living a life that is sold out for Jesus, then others would know us by our love, and it would not matter what church or what organization or what building that we actually go to on a Sunday morning. So therefore, does the name actually matter? And in the same breath, you could make the opposite argument, and we understand that, but we felt as though the name was doing more of a disservice than it was doing anything that was for us. And then there's also a few other things that we wanted to do or remove, and that was felt by massive feedback, because there was this ownership of certain events that were happening at the church, and it became like a massive thing. But one of the largest things that we did that really kind of tipped the scales is we proposed this idea of taking away a Sunday morning service. We proposed the idea of no longer meeting as a church on Sunday mornings, but rather meeting in smaller coverts everywhere across the city, and that those people can meet, and the people within the church would actually facilitate these groups and meetings, and then us as pastors, we would create content to then provide the facilitators and the people within the city to have these types of conversations, and have all of these things happening over dinner tables and living rooms and in people's homes, so that we were no longer a place to be, but the church was being expanded into the city, and that you were being a Christian where you were. So basically what we were doing is we were encouraging this idea of, we were fostering discipleship, that we were trying to reteach people how to be a Christian and how to actually live their lives as God has called us to do. That rather than just having something that you incorporate in your life, to actually put on something that you actually are, and to live out a life that is completely full of abundance, and that you are learning how to properly communicate the gospel with people, how you're doing life with other people, and how you were like encouraging others to really to reach the city in which that you live in. And although even today I think it is a brilliant idea, and there's actually one church that is doing it and did it very shortly after we positioned this, and are having an amazing success. Even though, like, in my mind to this day, I'm like, that is a beautiful idea, because it hits so many layers. It hits so many different things. It hits so many layers, and it hits so many different things that like are needed specifically in the church, that are needed to really revitalize what it is, and to really reach other people, and to have the impact that you are. It was met with an insane amount of like, people were genuinely offended. The amount of letters and phone calls, and the things that people were like offended that we were like sacrificing their firstborn. It was actually crazy how possessive, and how people truly believe that we were destroying something. We were destroying something that had been a part of the city, a part of their life, that their great-great-grandparents built this, and all of these different things. And the irony about it all is that when Jesus died on the cross, one of the things that happened when he died on the cross was the veil was torn. So basically, in Jewish culture, there was a veil that was in the temple, and behind the veil was the glory of God, and the only people who were allowed to go behind there to like meet God were the rabbis. And when that happened, when Jesus died on the cross, the veil was torn. It was ripped in two, and from top to bottom, And this was symbolizing the idea that like there is nothing now between you and Jesus, that you have full access to God, that you are now able to have a personal relationship with Jesus. And basically what it was doing is that, like, and the temple split in two. So it's removing this idea of the meeting God as a place, but rather that you are the church, that you are the temple, and that you can carry God wherever you go. And this is this whole like imagery that happens when Jesus dies on the cross. And this is like this beautiful thing, and really what sets religion from relationship. When you talk to like a born again Christian, is like, oh, I don't believe in religion, but I have a relationship. This is the type of thing that they're talking about, where they're talking about this idea where it's like, I am the temple of God, I am the church. So the irony of all of this is that we're trying to remove the temple again that has already been removed. We're just trying to do the things that we know that God has written in Scripture, that Jesus has done these things. So when we were met by that, it was just absolute. It was chaos. It was crazy. It was like one of the craziest years of our life. All of this was also happening in the middle of COVID, where people were already being stripped away of different things, and they felt as though they were being stripped away of a church, and then they wouldn't have a church to go back to, and all of these things. So this is the progression of it all. And then eventually we left, and we left the church. And we left it because we felt as though that there is something that is burning inside of us that we are so passionate about, that there is something so deep inside of us that we were not willing to bend our knee, but we were willing to offend people, that we were willing to really push the status quo, because we felt as though that this is what needed to happen, that this is the change that needed to occur to actually increase impact, to actually start to change the things for people and to change for people's lives, because we felt as though that we have something that we are carrying. And this is that we are carrying this beautiful message that we need to bring out in the world, and we do not care the vehicle in which that it gets spread. And we all, I think, we would all put ourselves in that idea of we are dreamers and misfits. We are the people who are trying to push the status quo. We are people who are constantly asking questions why, and are not okay with things just being done because of tradition, or just because this is the way that we've always done things. And those are the things that like boil my blood. It's like, okay, well, this doesn't make any sense, so that we're going to change things. We're going to do things differently to be more effective and to actually accomplish the thing that we are trying to accomplish. And this is the antithesis. This is the everything of why we need people who are dreamers and misfits. This is why we need people who are challenging the status quo, who are asking the questions why, who are pushing back, not just for the sake of pushing back, but with intention, because they need to increase impact or to change the world, to make things different, to change the things that are happening in the world, and to really reevaluate and to innovate the way in which that we live. This is why. So if you have that gut feeling, if you have that thing that is burning inside you, if you have that conviction that is happening, the first thing that I would do, and I would encourage you to do extremely, is to work on your communication. Because communication, like I said at the beginning of all of this, is that communication is the story that you are able to communicate with others, whether that's through visuals, or whether they're audio or feeling, or all of these things, all of those things. If you are able to communicate that message inside of you well and effectively, those are the things that are going to start to change and shift things. The number one thing that I think of when I think of the people that are able to explain and to cultivate their vision is someone who, like Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was a marketer in the tech space. I think if you had placed him in any other space, he probably would have been just as revolutionary, because what was revolutionary for him was not necessarily the products and the things that he was doing, but the ability to attach vision to what he was doing, and to express that vision with such conviction and vitality, and the amount of conviction that he had, that other people can get on board and feel as though they've been heard, and that they were able to make a difference with what it is that he's doing. I'm just done with trying to filter what it is that I'm trying to say. I'm done trying to push down that feeling, trying to constantly just kind of, oh, it might offend people. I'm so done with it, because I feel as though that the world is ready for people to shake things up, where people need new things. And without the people who are willing to change things and to really affect things, we're gonna be in a stalemate of a world, and that's a world that I don't want to see. I want to be brave enough to actually believe the dreams that I have, and I am stupid enough and I am naive enough to think that if somebody has done it in the past, that I too can have that for myself.